bad design is everywhere. Here is an image with a bad graphic design. Can you list all the issues for this one? Now that I have your attention, welcome to Design Hub, where our objective is to get you aligned with design. You already know what this video is about. Fundamental laws of graphic design. You started off with reviewing a bad design. How many errors were you able to find? There were quite a few. That design was made by me, and of course, I just wanted you to catch as many errors as possible. Through this video, I would want to explore the principles of graphic design and hopefully fix some major issues in that design by the end of the video. So stay tuned till then. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through just 5 laws of graphic design and one for bonus segment. Now, these laws would help you execute your designs better, or maybe just give you accurate responses to the bad graphic design in the marketing team, the one that you probably know. Now, you can't be a good doctor just by knowing the names of your body parts. Similarly, you can't be a good graphic designer either by learning just the laws of graphic design. You need to be practicing and learning to become a good graphic designer, or probably a better one. Now, this video and through this channel, I aim to tap into your graphic designer's soul and get you aligned with design. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button or the bell icon, do that now. I'll wait. Okay, getting started. The 5 topics that we are going to be discussing in this video are white space, proximity, contrast, hierarchy, and repetitions or patterns. Once we're done learning these, we will get to the poster design that we saw in the beginning and look at how to fix it, the design. If in the end you end up enjoying all this content, you will definitely like the bonus segment that I'm placing at the end. Now, this is not a law, but this is a good practice to keep in mind when you are working towards design. So let's get started. White space. Simply put, white space is the empty space around content and elements on a page or a screen, and even with document or codes. This is known as white space. It's used to balance design, organize content, and limit and improve the visual experience for the user. If you can see that these 3 dots on the screen, they have a lot of area between them. So I could say that these areas are even the white space. So that's basically what white space is. If I was talking about the slide itself, I could see that all of this area is the white space, which is basically keeping it free, keeping it empty, and letting the content have a lot of space so that it can breathe. It has a structure and it seems somewhat organized. Now, when you're working with white space, so the one thing that I need you to understand is that there are 2 types of white spaces. This one and this one. What that means is this is basically the micro workspace, white space, and this is the macro white space. The difference is very minimal. The difference is basically the less and the smaller areas which are between text or between areas, between any elements on screen, is the micro white space, and macro white space is the area between the large elements. Now, both of these are necessary because the micro white spaces, they allow some sort of a gap and even consistency of content from one piece to another. The macro white spaces, they let the elements be slightly free, so they are easy to understand and they are easy to consume by a particular user. Carrying on from over here, if I move on to the next slide, you can see that this is one of those examples or like a poster with a really great white spacing. So you can see that this area, these areas are all big white space, and you can see the benefit that happens with it. Even though that this content, this triangle over here is not relevant, but it gives a nice touch to the entire text over here, which is the Boogie Days Forever Festival. Now, you can say that the white space which is between these areas are the macro white spaces, and this area over here as well is macro white space. This is the macro white space, and segments like this, and between these two lines and over here you can see that there is some lines, this spacing over there as well between the date and the time. Those are micro white spaces. So if none of these were there, it would have been really difficult to understand the content. And that's what white space is. The first thing that you need to do when you're creating content is to give content a lot of breathing space that allows you to plan your content after that in terms of hierarchy and contrast. Now, these are principles that we learn right after, and that's basically to start off with the white space. And then over here as well, you can see that these small spaces are then the macro white spaces, because these are distinguishing between large elements, and the content that is here. So you can see that this content or this space and this space, these are the micro white spaces. Both of these different types are necessary to club content together and to distinguish it as well when necessary. Now that you've understood what macro and micro white spaces are, let's see this in action. Over here I have two different elements, two different posters. This is one poster, and then this is the second poster, which is slightly improved. The couple of things that we are looking at over here is to improve the white spacing. So on this screen, on my left side, I can see that there are a few elements which are slightly out of place, and that is why they consume a lot of white space where we could have probably eased out the elements. So for instance, this sign of the torus, this particular pencil over here, and even these small arrows which are over here and here. In fact, even this particular icon over here. So if I remove or move elements around, I've moved this over here, this pencil moves over here. The torus sign has been made smaller and put right next to the text like that. The white space that was being consumed by this text without a container has been moved into a container like this. And lastly, we've removed these arrows over here as well, because it's of course clear that there is a header and this is a pattern that is available. So this has basically been saving some white space for us, and this basically makes it all very clear for us to consume content, making it easier to understand and keeping it lighter on the eyes. So this is an example of learning white space. The second one is proximity. Proximity is basically the idea of grouping elements together so that the closeness of elements to one each other represents its organization, focus, and relationships. That's what we're looking at in proximity. And when in this diagram, you can see that the different type of red categories which are there, the different purple dots and the green dots, although they are similar, they are not exactly the same, but they have been placed together because they are similar to each other in a sort of relationship. And that's exactly what proximity is. Now, let's see how we are looking at that in action. Now, continuing from the previous image that we were looking at, the couple of things that we had done to fix proximity, and I hope that you are able to take a guess at it, is the elimination of these arrows. Now, even though in the updated design that we have just moved this element right over here, the idea is to eliminate certain segments so that the proximity can take care of that entirely. So this is exactly what proximity means, which is clubbing similar elements together. And taking a different example over here. Now, this is one of those designs that I came across on the internet. And of course, we started working towards it and seeing what can be improved. But here is a breakdown of the content of the entire slide. So we do see that there is a live date that has been put. The segment, the webinar which is supposed to be there, is live on a particular date. This is the topic. Reinforce your business with good financial planning. This is the webinar, and this is here the time. Now this is the space, or this is the guy who is going to be taking these the webinar, and I suppose him is Daniel. And then for finally more information, we've probably got some phone number over here, Maybe you could have added a slight different segment over here as well, which is probably like a website or something, and that's what we'll try to fix in it. So to fix proximity, what are the elements that you can club together? The first thing that does come to my mind is date and time. Now this is the first thing that can be fixed. The second thing that can be fixed would probably be the face, the speaker, and the name of the speaker. Maybe that's the second thing that we could fix. And then thirdly, probably this part, which is the phone number and website. So these are a couple of things that you could put together and they will work. Now, the idea of how I am thinking of what needs to be clubbed together basically comes from understanding what the content is. If I can club content together in a single fashion in my head, for instance, seeing date and time, that same thing could be represented very similarly on the slides also, or in any visual presentation. So you don't have to stress too much about the idea of how do I club things together. Just try to find out things that work together better than the others. So for instance, live could be just be an information, and the date and time could go together better. Live and date also works, but there is a better relationship with date and time. And that's why we will put those two things together. And fixing all of these things, this is the final poster that we do come across. So what we have done over here is this segment remains as it is, no change over here. The date and time has been fixed together. The speaker has been put right next to his identity. That's exactly what we've done over here. And for more information, we've added a name and a website. Okay, so I do see that there was a website which is also visible, and we could have probably just moved it right over here. So this is basically the kind of things that we have done, and this is the idea of proximity. You put things together just to make sure that everything works together, is together. Now here is another visual. These are also very similarly a couple of points that you have been given and told about that this is probably the classroom rules. So this is a poster designed for a young audience. Now I could say that 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 are done well, and they are probably the 5 pointers that that the student might need to take care of. How can you fix the proximity issues over here? Take a second, think about it, and then resume. The two things that I could think of, the two ways I could think of this could be fixed is one, of course, the alignment is slightly off. So maybe I could have just written one and then raise your hands, something like this. But then, of course, writing it one after the other, like words over here, will not be able to give a lot of space or white space to the entire visual, and that's why I will probably not do it. I think we can still go with one. Raise your hands, something like this. I can just erase all of this, and that's probably the first thing that we could keep in mind. Now the second thing that we probably could have done is writing something like one, raise your hands, something like that, which is gives, so basically 1 over here and 2 over here, 3 over here, 4 over here, and then 5 over here. Slightly off because then the alignment would again not work, because 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 should ideally be one underneath the other, and that is why we could do it this way, but will probably be not the best solution. The best solution that my team could think of, and I couldn't honestly, was something like this. So instead of keeping it as points, they ended up creating these small circles on the numbers itself and keeping it together. So now this is a proximity segment that has been used over here, and that is the final solution to this design. Third one is contrast. Contrast basically means exactly what you might be able to use it in a regular language, which is to showcase the differences or actually highlight the differences between two different elements. Now these differences could be in color, size, or even the shapes. the image over here, they are able to showcase this contrast by changing the size, the color, and probably the style of that icon as well. So you can see the first one over here, the red one is larger in size. This is slightly more visible than the other, so there has been a change of opacity, and the third one has a slightly different outline than the others. Now you have probably seen all of these when you're working with, or when you're using certain set of apps in your phone, or even if you're selecting something from a list of items. You always get some sort of a highlight to distinguish between the other elements. And that's exactly a part of the contrast in graphic design as well. So moving on to understand this in action, you can see that this is a visible text, that this is a text on a poster. It's about education, and the text says education is not limited to the classroom, it's a lifelong journey. Now, just to make it simple and clear, this contrast that we're talking about is slightly simpler than the usual contrast. So we need to make sure that the text over here is not getting overshadowed by the other elements on the screen. In this particular case, the one that we are talking about is the grid. Now the grid is so strong that it's hard to read the text right over there. And that's what happens, and that's how we fix it. We've reduced the opacity of the grid right over here to make sure that the content is more readable. The intention over here is not to give a sort of a different contrast in comparison, but just to make it readable and make it clear and distinguished from the other elements on screen. So this is the first type of contrast that we've seen. Now this is the second example where the text has been put on a nice exhibition and art poster, but the text is not readable. And to make it readable, we have added something like a contrast element over here. Now if you do notice, this contrasting element is not taking away the art over here in the background. It's still a slightly lower opacity right over here. You can see that these are elements which are visible in the background, but what it does is it segregates the text from the background, so it makes it a little bit more readable. And this is one of the important parts to make sure that the text is more clear than the art itself. Now this is the third variation of where we'll learn about contrast. Now you can see that there is a sort of proximity principle that has been applied to keep the text together over here. Similarly over here, and the assumption is that add a description of the food item, which is the basic template text right now, is connected to the visual over there, to the main item over there. And how this has been slightly modified is to do a slightly different color or a heading for that segment. So what this basically means is changing the shape and the color of the text gives it a more contrasting element than the rest of the description. This is a very simple technique that you probably have used in the headings or titles, even in books, and that's a simple example of how changing the shape or the structure was able to distinguish elements even in close proximity. So this was item number 3. Now the next one is hierarchy. Very simply put, hierarchy is exactly what it means in language over here as well, where the most important one is given the most attention and everything else follows. I have a very great example of this one that I've usually found on the internet, and that is this. If you look at this text and spend some time with it before we continue. Did you enjoy this one? Across the entire poster, the text has been modified in different types or different scales that is available. To get started off, the major one you will read this first is the most bold text on the screen, starting off with a blue color, which is just set up for contrast. The second thing is, and then you will read this next, which has been reduced in size. Now, depending on how you probably are experienced with reading content, generally the format that almost everybody follows who's reading English follows sort of a Z format. So basically we start reading a text, then we move to the right side, then we move to the next line, and then continuing reading that side as well. This is also similarly referred to as the F style of reading. So you go from here and then from here and then continue towards the bottom. Now on that basic style is what this entire design is applied on, and what is happening is you start by reading this, You go this way, then this over here, right next to it over here. And then because the flow is not breaking and you are able to read that text over there as well, then you end up going over here, and that's where you end up reading this particular line. Now at this point you might have come on this segment. You'll probably read this before the paragraph, and you will go back to read the body copy if you want to know more. So this will redirect you over here because there is no other element which is in the close proximity which is of similar size. Once you've done with all of these and then there is nothing remaining for you to read in this particular area, that is when your eyes would wander and you would come over here. At some point you may come back to read this line or maybe not. So this is exactly what hierarchy demonstrates. Hierarchy is basically setting up certain things as the most important ones and then following up from there. Now the ways to set up this hierarchy is with different styles. The most usual one is by setting up the different size, could be a different color. Of course, you could think of as one with high visibility is going to be the important one, and probably the one with low opacity could be smaller. In text, we could also change the size or the color of the shape or of the text as well. And then placement of those elements on the screen is the next segment, is the next style of actually walking through the hierarchy. So this is a simple example of hierarchy. Executing this in a poster which is very simple and similar over here, let's just go through this. When I start looking at this particular poster, the one on the left, what happens is I started off looking at this one over here. Then I do see that there is a senior illustrator. I'm assuming at this point in time that they're probably trying to search for somebody or somebody has created this. Then there is a text that is written over here, which is Studio Shortway is in a search of a senior illustrator. Some sort of an explanation over there, and then the general requirements. Now these general requirements just put you down: bachelor's degree, 3 years of experience, design tools, excellent communication, please send this. Okay, so this was not supposed to be a line over here. This is an instruction that could have been slightly segregated. And then there are 2 dates which have been given for the entire process. So trying to improve this over here, and this is what we have come across with. We start off by calling out exactly what we are doing, we are looking out for, and then comes the senior illustrator segment. Now at this time, we can also design the content slightly differently, make it slightly bigger, and at this point, we've made it more readable because a lot of white space was available over here that we could have played around with. You could also see that even the text moves slightly smaller because the important part over here was as an assumption that we are looking for. So that's something that we can start off with. And then we could see the rest of the segment, which is general requirements and the bullet points that are necessary. And very clearly, the next segment, which is the next problem statement after this at the similar level of hierarchy, is the submission and the interview date. Right after all of this is done, this is where the instruction is for sharing your CV and portfolio. Now again, this is the first version of the draft that we had created, and then moving on, there were a couple of more changes over here. To change this was the first objective because what is more important is to send across your CV and then understanding the last date for submission, because you do not know what your last date for the submission would be if you do not know what you're submitting, right? That is exactly the first switch that has been made over here. Now the next set of settings is, of course, this text was slightly big and not necessary. We have reduced this in size because this not making a lot of difference. And changing this over here is basically the next part. The other thing that has also been done is reduce the size of this segment because still clear we don't, that is not as important as the role itself, because if somebody is a senior illustrator, it will probably catch its eye, right? And that's why we have made this text slightly bigger. And then everything else remains sort of same. This illustration has been made smaller because not a lot of value with that on screen, and that is exactly how this poster has been modified to keep it a good structure in of hierarchy as well. Now you could see something very similar in the poster that we had seen earlier. The hierarchy has been set by giving it a bolder text and a lighter text over here, and that sort of pattern continues, right? And this is going to be the main area, which is the center of the screen. You will probably start off by reading the Christmas dinner menu segment, and then you can see maybe this content, or you could end up going through here and then coming back right over here. Probably the last segment would be that this Merry Christmas, family and friends. And very similarly, you could see that over here in this poster as well, the focus has to be on the two major things, which is the 45% off and the book now. Now, book now is basically called the CTA, which is something called call to action, which is supposed to be the calling function for the viewer. If somebody comes across that, they will have to come across the CTA and then click on that button. So that's why the CTA is highly important, and then the offer that is being given across, and then is basically everything else that is kept over here. So they have also increased this in the hierarchy by giving a slightly more contrast than any other element, although this text sort of competes with the focus, so we could probably reduce the size and keep the major segments over here. So this was hierarchy, and then moving on to the last one, which is repetition and or pattern. Now, the repetition and pattern is basically consistency in the style of elements or the placement of elements to explain the interest or the unity in that entire design. Now, looking at the design over here, you can see that there is one big red ball and then there are two small red balls. Similarly, there is one big purple ball and then there are two small purple balls, and finally one big green and the other two small green balls. Now, this sort of pattern helps in recognition. Think of it this way: when you were probably going through the last book that you were reading, the title is always the same size. The text, which is consistent, is always the same size. The page number, if that is kept on the screen or on the page, is always the same size and in the same location. This is getting you used to the pattern, so that every time that you need to go and check that sort of information, it is available every time there, right? And that is basically what we can see over here. We have seen a couple of these this poster already. We saw that how the pattern has been created with the first one, and that sort of continues with the other ones over here as well. And similarly, this new design that is working over here, the artistic process is the major content, which is the heading, and then with every text there is a number 01, the text over here, and then the subtext or the content for this one. Similarly, you can assume that all of these are going to be similar, right? So this is the process of understanding and creating a repetition or a pattern. Now, if I just quickly go through what the initial poster had been and how we ended up modifying it, was something like this. Of course, there was some issue in the white space that we sort of fixed. The objective over here was to make it as consistent as the other segments. So the 01 on this poster over here and had been moved to this side, which makes it similar for all of these elements, and that keeps it easy because you can see that 01 over here and then 02 over here and then 03 over here are not consistent. They are not consistent with where the text is and where the number is. So that's what has been done over here. Then, to give it slightly more breathing space and understand the principle of hierarchy as well, we have also reduced the image size because these are not as important, and that's what happens over here, and those basically gives some sort of a breathing space to the entire design as well. Now, let's do this very quickly. I will give you 2 minutes to, actually 2 is too much. I will give you 10 seconds to think of what can be improved in this design and why we had moved from this pattern to the next one. And here is your design. The design pattern that we have repeated, that we were able to see in the first image, was that the text, the item and the price was put together. Of course, this is a continuing pattern. There is nothing wrong with this pattern, and that's why we did not know where to begin with. I'm sure that you would have probably been through the same stage. Now, the second thing that we did understand was probably the price is an important factor. And that is why we've kept everything aligned according to the price. And then that was still not working. We could also argue that the text was as important, or the name of the dish was as important as the price, and you might want to segregate them or keep them together. So that is how we arrived at this sort of a structure, where the price is repeated in a singular pattern, where every time that you are looking at a text or an item, you know where to look at for the price. And that's exactly what happens across the three designs. And that was basically the five major fundamental laws of graphic design. Now, again, this video is not over. We had to complete what we had started off. I would suggest this. Start off and go to the initial part of the video, go back to that design, and basis on what we have just understood, quickly go through the ideas that you can use to fix that graphic design. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe.